Yeah, what happened? He challenged God to a wrestling match? He won? Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to Espresso with Sky, where you get a fresh perspective on faith, life, God, and the Bible. My name is Sky. Over here, my sidekicks, Chewy and John Wick. Now, if you haven't done so already, go ahead, hit all those buttons, subscribe, like whatever it is. But the most important thing is leave a comment below after you hear today's topic. Would love to hear what you think so we can have an honest conversation. So, if you want to support this ministry, we have PayPal and buymeacoffee.com when you can actually buy me a cup of coffee. All right, so let's get into today's topic. Now, there are some weird stories in the Bible, but this one takes the cake. There is actually an Olympic event in the Bible where Jacob challenges God to a wrestling match. Now, if you heard that someone challenged God to a wrestling match, who would you bet on? You'd probably sell your house, you'd sell your car, you sell your children, maybe your wife, like you'd sell everything and you'd bet on God. Why? Because how could God lose? But he does. God loses. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean God's not almighty? Does that mean God's not all powerful? How could God lose? What happened? So let's take a deeper look into the story when Jacob wrestles with God. Now let's look into this story, which is found in Genesis chapter 32. Now, it's an interesting story, but the first question we really need to ask is, why? Why would you wrestle with God? There's got to be a reason behind it. You don't do it just for fun. So let's take a look at the situation he's in. Now, in the beginning of the chapter, it shows that he's about to meet his brother Esau. Now, he hasn't seen his brother in decades, but his brother is still livid and furious because Jacob stole his birthright. So Esau doesn't just come to meet Jacob by himself. He comes with 400 of his own men. And in verse 7, you see that Jacob is in fear and he's in distress. So this is a situation. What was he wrestling for? Jacob challenged God because he wanted something from God. But if you look in verse 26, it shows that Jacob would not let go of God until he received his blessing. Why is that blessing so important to Jacob? Because he knows that if God blesses him, then he will not die in the hands of his brother. And that's why he held on until he beat God. Can you imagine that every time you wanted something from God, you'd have to wrestle him? Do you know how many people would be taking wrestling classes? But it's crazy. Wow, you have to wrestle God to get his blessing? So the next thing we need to figure out now is, what does it mean that he wrestled with God? What actually happened? There's a hint to figure out what actually happened in this story. And after he wrestles with God, God gives him a new name. In verse 28, God says to him, your new name will be Israel because you struggled with God. The name Israel means to struggle with God. Now, what do you mean by struggle? Well, if you look at the word wrestle, it has multiple definitions. One is the one that we all think about, is to grapple and overpower your opponent. But a second definition of the word wrestle means to be in deep thought, consideration, and debate. Think about this, guys, right now. It's not just a physical thing. There is a mental component to wrestling. We're like, well, what does that mean? Well, let me ask you this question. Have you ever wrestled with God for a blessing? Have you ever said, God, I really want this. Now come down. I'm going to fight you right now because I want your blessing. And the answer is never. Why? Because we who have faith, we have a different battle than the world does. If you look in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3 through 5, it says, we wage a different war than the world does because we are in spiritual warfare. So what does that actually mean? Let me show you an awesome story that proves this is how we struggle and gain things from God. Let's look at Luke chapter 18 verses 1 through 8, and this is the story of the persistent widow, and this will give us our answer. Now, in this story, there is an unjust judge, does not fear God or man, and then there's a widow that comes every day to this judge saying, grant me justice. But every day the judge says no and refuses her every day. Now, when you get to verse 5, the judge suddenly begins to realize, man, she is coming every day, and if I don't grant her justice, man, she is going to wear me out. So what does the unjust judge do? He eventually just grants her justice and sends her off. Now here is the most interesting part in what God says after, right? So Jesus says this, learn from this unjust judge. If this unjust judge will grant the wishes of this persistent widow, then how much more will God bring justice to his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? How do we plead? How do we struggle? How do we wrestle with God for his blessings? It's not through wrestling. There's nothing physical. We do it through prayer, and we struggle, and we cry, and we ask God, please just grant us justice. And God says, if this unjust judge can do it for this woman just because she's persistent, how much more will God do to his chosen people who cry out to him day and night? How do we win? How do we gain God's blessing? It doesn't happen through fighting. It doesn't happen through punching and hitting or even wrestling with God physically. It happens through prayer. And we've all gone through it, guys. We've all gone through the struggles, the tears, just praying to God every day to grant us justice. And when God does, we say, wow, thank you so much for blessing us. It's just like Jacob. He would not let go until God blessed him. And in the same way, we have to realize what actually happened there. It's not a physical wrestling match. We don't do that. We have the spiritual battle where we struggle and we keep asking God and pleading with him, please God, grant us justice. And then God does. Now, some of you might ask, well, in the story, it also says that he physically had pain in his hip socket. Now, let me ask you this question, guys. How many of you have prayed for a really long time? Now, I'll tell you this one experience I had. I prayed for 40 days straight for 7 hours every single day on my knees. And guess where the pain was? Yes, I'm doing a spiritual battle, crying out to God, but my pain was in my hip socket. Yeah, when you're praying on your knees, on the knees, pleading to God for 7 hours straight, for 40 days straight, you will get the pain in that hip socket too. It's a natural and normal thing. What happened during this struggle with Jacob and God? It wasn't the struggle of a physical battle. It was the spiritual battle, pleading persistently to God to answer our prayers. And this is what we do each and every day. That is the spiritual war that we always do. And just like Israel, we have to be those that struggle with God every single day. All right, guys, I hope that gave you an answer to today's story about Jacob wrestling with God, and it also inspires you to wrestle with God every single day. Everyone, have an awesome week. Thank you for joining us here on Espresso with Sky. My name's Sky, my two sidekicks, Chewy and John Wick. Hope you guys have an awesome week. If you want to support us on our ministry, go ahead. We have PayPal and buymeacoffee.com. All right, guys, everyone, have a wonderful week. See you again. Bye-bye. Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo, that's the wrong one. I got to figure out another one for that.